It could be me. Let me turn it down just a little bit. Is
Okay.
that a little bit better?
That is better. I can hear you more clearly. Yes.
There we go. All right, folks, we're joined in the studio by Kris Brooks. Kris Brooks is spent some time in North Carolina, and then she's over there in the European area right now. She'll tell us a little bit about that move, and then she'll tell us a little bit about yoga because she's definitely a yoga practitioner and doing things of that nature. How are you doing today, Kris?
I am doing great. I am doing
That is good
great.
to
Really
hear.
excited to be seeing you.
Glad to hear that you're doing well and everything. I was actually reading that you, of course, your background is having done the power yoga and done work with athletes and things of that nature. Now, like I said, you're overseas. So tell folks how you got overseas and a little bit about the yoga background, and then we'll go from there. But that'll where we'll start the conversation at is just a little bit about your background. Like I said, I noticed you had done some work with NASCAR, and of course, NASCAR has been in the news, some for good and some for bad, but definitely has been in the news. And then definitely some people forget how much I'm actually a non-driver. I do the whole mass transit thing, but I have a great deal of respect for drivers, and I know that that can actually be a very physical exercise. But people forget about that, the physical aspect, particularly with drivers of like race cars and things of that nature. They're always thinking about that being a sport like bowling or golf, but even golf, you have to do a lot of walking. So those are actually sports that I think people don't give enough credit for in terms of their physicality.
Yeah, you're right. The physicality aspect of it is very impressive once you see it in real life and in action. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But with yoga, so I started as a practitioner. I practiced yoga. I found benefit in it mentally and emotionally. Physically, it kicked my butt. I did not really enjoy that aspect of it at first. It was challenging, but I needed that challenge. So like I said, mentally and emotionally, I got something from it that I never got anywhere else. So I pursued it, and I believe it was 2013. I became a teacher assistant. So that's when I started my journey there. I was still working as a bartender, and I was doing lighting. I was working in the lighting field in the lighting industry, but I started to pursue that, and then really got involved. 2015, I became a teacher, and then I never looked back from there. So I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of professional athletes, the Carolina Hurricanes, Charlotte Checkers, some members of the Hornets, but mainly NASCAR. So I've had the opportunity to work for quite a bit. Quite a bit of a variety. So mainly working with pit crew members, but also I've worked with drivers as well, and some families of drivers and some crew chiefs. So it's been a good variety. But working with NASCAR is definitely something I miss doing. We don't have NASCAR here in Germany, but I'm still very, very connected from all the way over here.
What are some of the things that you found that you think athletes were surprised about in terms of using yoga as part of their exercise regimen? Because I know a lot of times they don't always think about things past, I guess, what most people would consider the main parts of exercise, which is like the calisthenics and the weights and things of that nature. So, what are some of the things that, as you got them into the practice of yoga, they were surprised to learn both about the skill of yoga and how it impacted their own exercise?
Well, so you have to, I found that I have to approach it in a very special way. So most of the men on these pit crews, they're D1 athletes, right? And so they're men, they're like, they're not usually too excited about the idea of yoga. So my approach first and foremost has to be like, hey, look, I totally get it. Let's hear your perception of what yoga is. Let me hear what you think it is, and let me help you create a new definition. And let me tell you what it's going to look like for you. And most importantly, let me tell you how this is going to help you and benefit you to get that competitive advantage. So a lot of them were doing a lot of heavy lifting, especially like jackmen. They're big guys, gas men. They're really big guys, and so they have the strength and a lot of times lack some of the mobility. So I just had to like word it in a way where, hey, this is going to help you. Like, you're going to be able to do better. You're going to be able to squat lower. You're going to be able to do all kinds of things. So once they understood the benefit, they were about it. Once, most importantly, once they saw the effect of it, then they were like, oh, this is working. Like, I don't want to admit it, but it is. And so then they became yogis pretty quickly, like once they noticed their bodies changing and their mindset too. So not only physically, but mentally, like, it's a competitive sport and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of time away from family. There's a lot of time away from friends. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of peer pressure. So the mental and emotional aspect of the practice also, I think a lot of them found benefit in creating a deeper connection to self. So I was surprised at how quickly they started to develop like and love for it. And hearing them say like, hey, that stretch was really working. And so I did it when we were in Miami last week and I felt great. And so like hearing them give me feedback that they were doing it even when I wasn't there was so amazing. It really was. But yeah, the physical aspect, like you said, driving, if I have to drive in the car for 2 hours, my hips are hurting for days. So I can't imagine sitting in the car for so long. And then these pit crew guys, what they do is it is a sport. Like, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to watch a race from the pits, but like, holy cow, these guys are so impressive. The work that they do, it's unbelievable.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I can tell you, one experience with yoga is I've been actually, there's a group here called, actually national, called Daybreakers, which is like those dance parties and everything. And they travel all over the world and everything. Of course, with people doing quarantine, they've done these dance parties online, which means that people have seen me do some very bad attempts at dancing because I don't have that many dancing bones in my body. But usually they start off with a mindfulness exercise at the beginning. So it might be meditation, but lately that I know at least several times they've done yoga, and I've tried to do some of the yoga steps and try to follow them. As a friend of mine suggested, you might have tried to jump into it too soon, too fast, because it was suggested I might have tried to do chair yoga because I've definitely got a little bit of extra weight that I need to lose, probably about 10, 15, maybe even 20 pounds or so that I need to get rid of, mostly around the stomach area. So they were like, you might need to try something a little bit more mild, because I was trying to follow the young lady, and actually she wasn't all that young. She might have been in her 40s or 50s, trying to follow her in the yoga steps, and my body was not really feeling it because, like I said, it was like some of those, for lack of a better term, I call them those praying mantis kind of poses, and some of those kind of like very much bend your body kind of poses. And I'm sitting there going like, nope, this is not the answer. So I might have to try the more calm method of yoga before jumping into the more strong and developed kind of things. But I was going to try to be Mr. Bold and leap out in there. And I've got some friends that are actually yoga practitioners right here in Durham, throughout the triangle and even the country and everything. So like I said, I might have had to back off and just try to do it a little bit in a more calmer kind of demeanor and not try to jump into all of the complicated
at least
steps
you have that
happen.
You have that awareness, which is amazing. And there's so many different styles of yoga, like so many. Restorative is always a great place to start, what I tell people. But sometimes we need that challenge. Sometimes we need to get thrown into that challenging class just to see what where we're holding ourselves back. And then sometimes we're like, yep, maybe shouldn't have pushed that hard. And like, that's okay too. I have days like that myself.
So, like I said, what are some of the different styles of yoga? You're right. I've heard of different styles. So I know there are probably like hundreds of them, but if you just want to give some of our listeners some of the main styles so they can get an idea maybe if that style is going to work for them, or if you want to just give a little bit of some of those different kinds of styles, or a few of the styles. We don't have to go through all of them, because I know there are probably several styles, and I know that yoga definitely started because I had a conversation with another person who was into it from like the eastern part of the world and everything. But just if you could give a little bit of your perspective of the history and some styles that you enjoy. Like I said, I know that you're definitely I think the style that you're involved in, if I remember reading correctly, is like power yoga. So it sounds like it's more involved with the athletes.
Yeah, so I could break down yoga philosophy and get down to the schools of yoga, but just to put it out there for people to understand that maybe don't have any experience or training with yoga, I think that's the best approach to do. So you can have yin yoga, which is basically it's just a few poses, very restorative, very relaxing. It's going to be extremely challenging mentally and emotionally because you're still, right? And from there you can have, and you'll see this advertised at a lot of different studios, something called deep stretch or something along those lines, it'll be called. And that too is just a few poses within the span of the class. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 90 minutes, and you're holding postures for about 3 to 5 minutes, usually holding deep breath. Usually it involves a lot of tools like bolsters and blocks so you can really support yourself, blankets. The idea is to be comfortable. And then you go up to like vinyasa. So vinyasa just means flow. Usually it's matching your breath to your movement. So I particularly love slow flow. So slow flow is just vinyasa. It's a power vinyasa slowed down a little bit. So you're holding postures for maybe 5 breaths or more. And then power yoga, which is what I usually did with the athletes unless we were doing a restorative day. I'm trained in Baptiste yoga. So that is a power vinyasa. It's about 3 to 5 breaths per pose. So it's quickly paced. I prefer it in a heated room. You don't have to do it in a heated room. Your body will create its heat on its own. So, and there's many, like people name these styles anything they want, right? There's a million names for it. It's been very westernized, but essentially look out for either a restorative or a flow. And then hopefully they'll be labeled as beginner or advanced. I teach all levels. So if it's your first day in yoga, or if you've been teaching yoga for 10 years, you're welcome in any of my classes, and both practitioners will have a benefit from the class. Both will find something. And the way I teach is like, do what you can, and no ego. Like the person next to you, you don't know their story. They could be doing this for 20 years now. This is your first day. So meet yourself with grace, and then just do what you can. Challenge yourself a little bit, but find that ease. And what I teach is just a suggestion. You take it where you want, right? But yeah, so those are the main things to look for if you're looking to jump into a class.
Wow. And I know that for a while there, yoga was becoming very popular. In your mind, is it still as popular as it used to be? Because I know there was definitely a period where a lot of the mindfulness kind of things, like I said, yoga, meditation, things of that nature, were growing in popularity, both here and abroad, like in Germany where you are and everything. But are you still seeing that kind of popularity continuing, or is it starting to wane a little bit?
That's a good question. I haven't thought too much about it. I do feel like it felt really trendy for a little bit. And to me, it's like, that's okay, because the more people exposed to a mindfulness practice, the better I think the world will end up being. So like, let it be trendy in that aspect, at least. And so, you know, it's interesting. I think in big cities, it's really popular. Like in Charlotte, there's hundreds of great teachers. There's so many great teachers, so many great studios, so many great social advocacy happening through yoga. There's so many unique things transpiring through this practice. Where I am in a more isolated, so I live in Bavaria, so it's like the southeastern part of Germany. There's like a farm in my backyard, you know, like we're kind of not in a big city. So the popularity is not the same. However, I still I don't practice any less now than I did living in Charlotte. So I don't know how to answer that. I think I hope it continues to be popular. I hope that people start to find their way in their niche and where they belong in the practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if I remember correctly, Bavaria is known for chocolate, if I remember correctly. So that's not exactly what would be a yoga practice, but I think that's whenever I think of Bavaria, I think of like something called Bavarian chocolates or something like that. So I
Look,
think that is definitely.
I eat all the chocolate. So yes, they have great chocolate. I don't know what exactly they might be known for, but German chocolate is amazing. Yeah, it is amazing.
So you're over there doing that. Now you mentioned that you had done lighting as well, and I do remember that about you and everything. What are some of the similarities between your lighting practice and what you did with lighting and your yoga and the yoga practice that you're very much currently involved in? What are some of the things that you found that were similar in the work you did with lighting and in yoga?
Wow. First, I want to say I am tickled to death and like love the fact that you asked me when you first asked me about this podcast, you mentioned lighting, and I was like, wow, like that was a different lifetime, right? And it's like that was such a big part of my life for so long. I rarely talk about it. So I am very grateful to have the opportunity to speak about that part of my life. So I went to, I have a bachelor's of fine arts. That was my first degree, and in technical design and production. So my big goal was to be this lighting designer, and that's all I wanted to do. So I did a lot of stagehand work. I did a lot of work with lighting in corporate settings and rock and roll settings. And one of the ways that I think it is similar to what I do with yoga is that it really invokes creativity. And to invoke that creativity, you have to be somewhat intuitive. So connecting to yourself and these big ideas, these big picture ideas, and then just kind of like trusting that instinct and going with it. And that's, for me at least, that's what shows up. Like you don't always know what you're doing. And sometimes you do know you think you know what you're doing, but then you get a better idea and you have to adapt and change. And so the mindfulness practice shows up in that way, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm imagining the challenges are also very similar. I've got friends that have done a lot of backstage work, whether that's being part of the planning crew, whether that's doing lighting, whether that's doing even grip kind of work and things of that nature. And definitely some folks that have done lighting and sound. And you're right, they oftentimes talk about how what they think they might have to do is totally different, or sometimes they know what they have to face. Like I know one of my friends talks about entire sets that he knew he was going to have to build for some of the bigger rock and roll shows and things of that nature. He knew that was going to be a challenge, but then there were other times that he might go in there and they might think of one thing, and after he got to talking to them and looking at what they had and what the music was and different things of that nature, he might give them suggestions that might change what they had in mind and things of that nature. So I know that just the whole lighting and sound thing can be really fascinating. I know I was talking to a friend of mine on another show yesterday, and he was talking about how he had done some work on I think it was a Parliament Funkadelic show or something like that, and literally they had the stage rise up. So, and he was at the time, he's 62 now, but at the time he was a teenager or like a young adult. So, as he put it, he was a little bit startled, and he's I think he's a drummer and a bass player, and I don't remember which instrument he was playing at that time, but it took him a minute to actually get himself in tune to be able to actually play, because they just told him to go out on stage, and then all of a sudden the stage rises and he's on there while the stage is rising. So I don't know that he was quite prepared to be in that kind of environment where the stage is going to rise. So what are some of the things that you remember from your lighting days? And are you still doing any lighting work at all? But what are some of the stories that you can share of some of your own lighting shows that you remember that might be of interest to our listeners and audience? Some of the things that you had to light that were different than other things.
Wow. Okay. So I'm not doing lighting anymore, and I still nerd out. Like if I am at a live music event or a show of some sort, my head is up. I'm looking at the lights 9 times out of 10. I'm still very passionate about it, and I leave it to other people. It's changed a lot since I've done it. But one of my most memorable experiences was I had the opportunity to work for Darius Rucker. So I'll keep it a little hometown-ish. You know, he's from the Carolinas, and so it was at the Charlotte Convention Center, and I don't remember what specific event he was there for, but he was there, and I was so excited. All of his road cases said Hootie and the Blowfish. They were like, you could tell he had traveled with these for so long, and setting up the show and everything went well. It was a really big deal. And then I just remember him performing, and I was standing on the side of the stage, and I was just really waiting for the show to be over because we had to tear it down that night. And this big dude just walks in front of me, and he was like, "Excuse me, ma'am, what are you doing here?" And I was so intimidated. And he was Darius Rucker's security guard. I was like, "Oh, sir, like I'm with the stage crew. I'm just here waiting." Like I showed him my wrench, I think. I was like, and he was totally cool. And then about an hour after we started the teardown, Darius Rucker stopped me, called me by my name. So his security guard had mentioned my name, and he stopped me, and I was like starstruck for a moment. And I just remember like feeling like I shrunk down. And he said, "Kris, I just wanted to thank you so much for all your hard work and all the hard work that you guys put into this show. It was so great." And I was like, wow, this man is so humble. And just to take the opportunity to stop like the little person, like literally, like I think on that show, I was just tearing down and building, right? So I wasn't running any lights. I didn't design any lights. I was just tearing it down and putting it up. And so for him to take the time to stop me and thank me, I was like, wow, I'll never forget this. Like, what a humble man. That you're such a great human being, and I will always remember that. So yeah, that was probably definitely my best memory.
Oh wow, that's really a touching moment and everything. Have you had similar moments with some of the athletes that you work with? Because I imagine sometimes they can have those really severe egos, but sometimes as you're doing the yoga with them, I was wondering if you have any moments that you remember. Because I know you mentioned that not just the NASCAR racers and the NASCAR crew, but you've also worked, I believe you said, with some of the football and basketball players that were down there in Charlotte. So what was some of your experiences that you remember with them? And if you could tell our audience a little bit about what brought you to Germany as opposed to still staying there in the Carolinas.
Okay. I didn't really have any of those like starstruck moments. I think that all of the athletes I've worked with are equally as humble. It's like they're just people, right? And they show up and they ask questions, and they're eager to learn and to be better and do better. And I have great relationships with most of the people I've worked with. We keep in touch. I still get messages from time to time about, "Hey, do you have my sciatic is bothering me. Do you know a stretch that can help me with that?" Or, so it's really been a cool experience overall. I've gratefully not ran into anybody with too big of an ego. And if I had, I throw in that power yoga real hard, and I humble them humble them up with that. But no, they've all been great. And so Germany, I'm here. I got married 2 years ago, and my husband, so he was my boyfriend at the time before we got married, decided to join the military at 28 years old. And so he had spent his life kind of doing for other people, like doing these jobs and going to school to do this and that because of pressure from other people. So at 28, he decided, I'm going to live my life for me. This is something that I've always wanted to do, and I think I want to do it. And I was like, do it. Like, heck yeah, like that's awesome. And so it took a lot of sacrifice to leave the career and the home that we had already had in Charlotte. But it was so worth it. So our first duty station ended up being Germany, and we moved here. Yeah, he moved here 2 years ago, and I moved here a year and a half ago.
So you've been there for a while. What has been some of the similarities you've noticed between Germany and the United States? Like I said, you spent a lot of time there in Charlotte. Your husband was definitely from around that area. But what are some of the similarities that you've seen and everything? And also, I was just wondering, how is Germany doing in terms of your assessment, in terms of dealing with the whole coronavirus? Because we know it's hitting the whole world and everything. So just wondering some of your assessments as to what's going on there in Germany and how it's doing as compared to the United States, and just the difference in societies in general?
Yeah. So Germany, I would not say there are many similarities. It is very different living here. We do live by a military base, right? So I work on a military base. My husband works on a military base. So it is Americanized in that aspect. But we live in a German neighborhood. I love the way Germany does things. The food is better. Sunday is a day of rest. People are very easeful, slow paced. It's been a great opportunity to slow down and just like take it all in. But in the big cities, not many things are different, right? So like Munich and Berlin, they're very international cities, and it's not much different than the U.S. But where I live, English is not always spoken, and it's very different. But Germany is said to be one of the best countries dealing with COVID-19. They really attacked it head on. So I live about 6 hours north of Italy, where it was really bad in Italy. And so when they started to see things happening in Italy, they really like locked down. So we've been on lockdown since the beginning of March. And just this week, the restriction was lifted for us to travel further than 50 kilometers from our house, which I believe is like 20 miles. Masks are still required in public everywhere you go. You have to have a mask. There are hand washing stations outside of any facility that's open, any grocery store, gas station. And only a certain amount of people are allowed inside buildings. The rules of gatherings. So we're allowed one household to be in our household. So we can have one family for dinner, but that's it. If you're caught with more than that, you can get fined. And the only gatherings that I've been to, so I went to a Black Lives Matter protest in Nuremberg. There were about 5,000 people there. It was an amazing experience. Everyone had a mask on and everybody was socially distant. So I could walk around with my arms extended and not touch anyone the whole time I was there. So Germans are very efficient people. They follow rules. Like if there's a sign that says walk on the right side and no one's looking, they're still walking on the right side. So I believe that they're handling it quite well. Have there been spikes recently due to the protests and the larger gatherings? Probably, yes. I'm sure that there are, but I haven't heard anything alarming as of recently.
Well, that's good to know. Now, the other thing that I remember about Germany, and like I said, I need to do more world travel. I've talked to my buddy Tim, who's actually, I think, watching us right now and everything, and he taught me a course in digital media and everything. So I've definitely said that I need to do more world travel, and he's agreed he needs to do more world travel too. I went to Turkey when I was literally a baby. I mean, I think I was maybe 6 months old and was there till I was like 3 or something like that. And then not that long ago, I went to a cruise, and the cruise took me to Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Grand Turk. So that's pretty much been by extent of foreign travel. So I need to do a lot better than that. Got a lot of friends from around the world, and a lot of them that I would like to visit and see what their lifestyle is like. So I need to do better with that. But Germany always does well in the Olympics. I'm a big Olympic fan, so I know that. And then the other thing that I know is the whole thing about the speed of the cars. I believe it's that whole Autobahn thing and everything. So how is it adjusting to that? Because, we try to go the speed limit here. We do have folks that like to do the whole drag racing and some of the other things that aren't all that cool in that sense. But that being said, what was your experience with that kind of faster speed limit?
Oh man. So I was ignorant to what the Autobahn was before coming here. I thought that the Autobahn was just one road. Like, you hear about the Autobahn being in Germany, and I kept saying, oh, I'm not going to go on the Autobahn, right? Like, I'm going to avoid that road because that sounds scary. Well, come to find out, the Autobahn is literally the highway everywhere. So if you're driving anywhere, you take the Autobahn and you will be driving. So do not get in the left lane. No one drives in the left lane unless they are going like super fast. And if you're passing, you better hurry up and get over to the right, because there will be some kind of like super fast car coming up so quick behind you, you don't even see it until it's right there. It is scary. Like if you're in the right lane, your car will shake the cars will go by so fast you can't even tell what color they were half the time, right? It's no exaggeration. It's pretty intense. However, Germans are fantastic drivers. Like, in the States, if somebody is like driving slow in front of you and you come up to them, they'll slow down even more just to be a jerk about it and just kind of like antagonize the situation. Well, here, if a car is coming up behind a slow car, that slow car gets over and lets them pass. Like, everyone is super courteous. The flow of traffic is really great. You rarely see an accident. They happen, and when they do, they're quite severe. But you rarely see one. And so I stay in the right lane, but I do believe that it has made me a much better driver. I've learned a lot about driving. I've become a more aggressive driver, which for me is a good thing because I was a very timid driver. But yeah, it's they drive fast here. That is no joke.
I remember about Germany was that they used to have, and I guess they still do. Of course, everybody is proud of the American cars and things of that nature. But Germany also has a great car culture as well, including some very fancy cars that are known throughout society and everything of that nature. Whether it's some of the more slicker, faster cars, or whether it's some of the more efficient kind of cars. But is that still the case? That Germany has that very strong automobile industry? Because I know that used to be the case.
Yes, and you see them everywhere. Like we took a road trip to Munich on Saturday, and we parked the car to get lunch, and we're walking around, and we have like this Ford Fiesta that we bought here, which you're in Germany and you buy Ford Fiesta, what the heck? But it's just like it worked out for us. It's a great road trip car, but we parked our little Ford Fiesta, and we're looking around, and it's like Bentley and BMW and Mercedes, and like we saw 2 Lamborghinis in Munich. It's just like, I've never seen these cars, and so many, like everybody owns a European car because they're in Europe. And it's just like, it's so different seeing them. They're much more affordable here because they're made here. So that, it makes sense. But yeah, I've seen cars here that I'm like, what kind of car is that? I've never seen this before in my life. They're really cool. They really are.
Well, that's good to know that they still got that car culture and everything. By the way, Tim, I was right. He is watching and everything. He was letting us know that he is part German on his dad's side and part Irish on his mom's side. So he's definitely able to relate to some of what you're talking about in the sense of Germany and everything. And he also said that his wife used to handle the lighting for musicals at the school that she teaches at, because his wife is actually a school teacher, and that he was letting us know that he is definitely loving the conversation that we're having. So he was just
that's
sharing that
awesome.
with us. So he was definitely letting us know that he was enjoying what we're talking about. Now, you said you did go to a Black Lives Matter, and I know there have been definitely support and allyship from around the world. So how did you find out about the one there in Germany, and have you noticed a lot of those taking place after the George Floyd case and everything? So how was it addressed in Germany when it first happened?
Yeah, so there's a lot of allyship here, and it's let me tell you, it is so powerful. I feel emotional just talking about it. It's so amazing to see the world being so supportive right now and coming together. It's unbelievable. So when the murder of George Floyd happened, and I started seeing all the activism happening in the States, and all of my friends taking a stand, and Charlotte taking big stands and doing a lot of stuff, I felt like I have to do something. I want to be a part of this. So I just started researching where I could go, and I found a protest, and I drove about an hour, a little over an hour away to go to this one. And this was one of the smaller ones in Germany, and there were 5,000 people there. Like, unbelievable. These protests are all over Germany, and the speakers were like, some of the speakers were speaking in German, and I had no idea what they were saying, but I was still crying, and I still felt it. Like, it was just the energy and the power, and it was so incredible. It's crazy seeing the protesters, posters and all of that, and a lot mentioning George Floyd, a lot mentioning the United States president. And it was just kind of like, wow, like, to see it in another country on another person's land was something else. It really was. And especially in Nuremberg, because the Nuremberg trials happened there where they prosecuted Nazis for war crimes during the Holocaust. That's when history says that the human rights movement started there, right? And so to be able to go to that same city and protest against or in support of human rights all this time later, there was something really powerful about that, and also something really sad that we're still having to fight for human rights. But it is happening, and the people here, they're not only protesting in support of what's happening in the US, but they're also protesting against police brutality that happens here, and the racism that still happens here in Germany as well.
Yeah, because I've also noticed not just with the whole conversation about race relations, but just about a lot of activism that a lot of the European countries are taking lead and taking a lot of activism kind of role. Like I noticed that one of the primary, and I can't remember whether she was from Germany or whatever, but one of the primary environmental ladies was Greta, and Greta was definitely got a lot of play around the world because of her stand on environmental things of that nature. So I'm imagining that there's probably a lot of activism of all sorts, not just on the race relations, but in the environment, in some of the other issues that are going on around the world.
Yeah, there really is. So she was from another part of Europe. She was not from Germany, but still, like, Europe really approaches things so much differently. Like Germany is so clean, like so clean. There, you do not see litter, you do not see trash, but in the bigger cities, you do, and that comes with being in a bigger city in a higher populated area. But the recycling is a really big deal. If you do not recycle correctly, you're fined. So it is. They definitely take care of the environment. They definitely take stands on a lot of different matters in human rights because of the Holocaust happening over here. It's something that Germany does not want to forget. So they are they find it very important to keep that history in the history. They teach it in the schools very powerfully. There are concentration camps that you're still able to go to and see. There's monuments that are still up. And their perspective on it is that we leave these things up so that we never forget what happened, so that we never go back there ever, right? And so the history here is so powerful, and I think there are still people really, really passionate and fighting for those rights today.
Wow. And I know that definitely a lot of the European countries, in my mind, are better even in their schooling system because they seem to teach a lot more of the history and teach more effectively a lot of the critical thinking skills, whether that's the arts, whether that's health, whether that's things of that nature. I was actually on a call yesterday and they were talking about that, just how they wish that there would be more teaching of health. And as one who is a practitioner of yoga, I'm imagining that you probably have those same kind of feelings that you would like to see both there in Germany as well as around the world, but definitely the United States, more of us taking a concrete view of health and all of the elements of health, because I wonder if we do a good enough job of that, but I was wondering what some of your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, you're right. The US, I feel like, is really behind on a lot of different things, especially with health. Look at food. One simple example, when I'm back home in the States, I can't eat bread without feeling sick. Here, I can eat bread all day and not feel sick because of the lack of chemicals in the food, right? Like here, most of the food seems very organic and it's not filled with all of these different hormones. If you buy vegetables, so we go grocery shopping about every 3 days. In the States, I could go grocery shopping for 2 or 3 weeks worth of food and it won't go bad because of all of the chemicals put in the food to make it last longer. Here, if you get fruit or vegetables, you have to eat it or it goes bad because it's fresh, right? And it's not filled with all these synthetic things. So education wise, yes, I think that there needs to be more education in the benefits of health, physical health, mental health, emotional health. I think that that's a main priority that needs to happen, and it needs to happen really young. It needs to happen in elementary schools, and you see it in like Montessori type schools. But I wish that there was more of it in the public school system. I do have friends, a yoga teacher friend of mine, Stephanie, she is a teacher, and I know that she does yoga with her students. She incorporates mindfulness into her teaching. And I believe she's at the elementary school level. But it should be built in the curriculum for sure, because
Yeah.
children, they're the ones that are going to change everyone else's minds. Like the children today, they're so empowering and they're so strong-minded, and they know right from wrong, and they need to be given more tools.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've noticed even about the Black Lives Matter movement is that a lot of the leadership is coming from young people. It's coming from people
Yep.
in their 20s. I would even argue teenagers and definitely in their 30s, whereas some of the folks that were 40s, 50s, and definitely in my dad's age range have kind of stepped aside and let some of these young folks take the lead in the leadership. So that's one of the things that I've noticed. And they seem to be very strong in that leadership. So I was wondering if you were seeing the same thing there in Germany, where a lot of the leaders are coming from the young folks.
Yes, definitely, definitely. The leaders at the protests that I went to, they're not affiliated with any organization or any group. They're just a group of people, and they organized the protests all over Germany. So there were several going on in the same day, and they, I would say, are mid-20s, late 20s, very young. And the crowd that I saw there, all young. Yeah, there were definitely people 40 plus, 50 plus there, but I would say that the great majority were teenagers and 20s and 30s.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you, like you said, we talked about the fact that you spent so much of your life there in Charlotte. I was just wondering, what was your take on a certain convention moving away from Charlotte? Because, like I said, it's going to be taking place, but just on a smaller scale. And I guess the big coronation will take place in Jacksonville instead.
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm really glad that that's not happening in Charlotte. Charlotte is too progressive, and Charlotte is it's a different kind of place, and that kind of energy doesn't belong there. Do I think that small businesses could have used the support from a convention like that? Yes, definitely. But that's the least of the issues, right? I think that having a convention that size is not smart when there is a global pandemic going on and numbers are increasing day by day, especially in North Carolina and South Carolina. I think that it was asking for trouble. I think that with all of the protesting and I don't want to say attacks from the CMPD, but there have been some not so great things happening. I think it would have created more distress and more issues. So I'm glad that they were able to move their business elsewhere. And yeah, that's just my personal opinion.
Yep, that makes sense. And then the other thing I was going to ask you was, like I said, NASCAR, when we first started, I mentioned that it was on the news for both good and bad reasons and everything. But I just wondering, as somebody that works with the NASCAR drivers, what was your take when they tried to open up the races and tried to have the races on a regular basis? Because I know there were certain races, I believe Ace Speedway was doing races and things of that nature. So I was just wondering, as one that had worked with NASCAR drivers, what your take on that whole thing was.
I think that there's never a right answer, right? Like you're gonna make people uncomfortable and you're going to make people upset no matter which direction you take. I think that their approach, they were able to adapt pretty quickly, and their approach as far as like they're still having races, but they don't have all the fans in the stands. They're wearing the masks, they're taking the precautions. I feel that a lot of these guys, they work year round. They have like November and December off, and then they're back to work. And so they want to be busy. I'm glad that they're not out of work for one. I'm speaking more specifically to the pit crew drivers. The drivers themselves and the team owners can probably afford to be out of work for a little bit, but the pit crew guys, I'm glad that they have work. The political, and I don't even think they're political. I think they're humanitarian stances that NASCAR is taking right now is it's about time. It's about time that they're making statements and doing the right thing, because my favorite, I've worked with a lot of teams, and some of my favorite ones are the most diverse teams in NASCAR. Their pit crews are extremely diverse. They have NASCAR has a diversity program, so they were trying to bring more diversity into the sport for the past few years, but it was like they were doing that for the benefit of racing and for the benefit of the sport. But now they're doing some statements in benefit of those people. So they brought people in to diversify the sport, and now they're actually taking a stand for the people that diversified it. And I think that that's amazing. And I think it took a lot of courage. It took a lot of courage for NASCAR, with a fan base that they have, to make the statements that they've made, knowing that it's going to create an uproar, and they don't care, right? And sometimes that's what social justice is all about. You're going to make people uncomfortable, and that's good, right? It's like, if you're not making people uncomfortable, you're not really fighting a fight of social justice, in my opinion. So, I have a lot of thoughts. One of my best friends, he is a pit crew coach, and he is a gas man for NASCAR, and he is a Black man, and he is working in this sport, and he is making change with his perspectives. And he said something very powerful to me this morning. He said, we were talking about all the negative feedback in the comments about the removal of the Confederate flag from the properties. And he was like, you know what, like, a lot of people are upset, but we're now having these conversations, and that's what's important. Like, we're able to open up the space for these conversations. Some people aren't willing to have them, and that's on them, but we're holding this space, and things are happening, and people are talking, and things are changing, and that's what it's about. It's about educating people and hopefully shifting perspectives.
Yeah, I was definitely a big supporter of that whole campaign that I believe it was Bubba Wallace put together to try to get the Confederate symbols away from NASCAR, and it was definitely successful in that initiative that he put together. So I thought that was a wonderful thing that he was able to put together, and hopefully that'll bring about some changes. Because you're right, a lot of times people even forget about the history of NASCAR, the fact that NASCAR pretty much came from the whole running of liquor and things of that nature, that was kind of its starting point, and that there were some African American racers that were part of that and everything. I remember the one, and I don't remember his name, but it's the one that Richard Pryor played the role of in one of his movies, but it was one of the early African American race drivers. So there, like I said, I know they've been working on diversity programs, and there are a couple of sports that have been working on diversity programs. I think even the NHL, which is the hockey, has been working on some diversity, and some other sports that aren't necessarily having a strong presence of minorities have been trying to change that and everything. So it's good seeing that happen. By the way, Fernando Zeladon is watching us and checking us out all the way from Los Angeles, California. He is definitely a very powerful activist over there in Los Angeles. He's worked with a number of folks. He's even done some work around with Maxine Waters and things of that nature. So he's checking us out from Los Angeles, and definitely was enjoying the conversation, and just wanted to give you a shout out and say that he was really enjoying the conversation and learning a lot about the different things that you're involved in. So I was just sharing that with you. So
awesome. Thank you. Hello.
Yeah. So he was definitely, so we appreciate you being here and checking him out. And he's definitely got that going on. So we definitely appreciate his thoughts on that. Like I said, coming back to the yoga and everything, as you've been doing this work, what are some of the things that you've learned the most that surprised you? We always learn things about ourselves when we do work of any sort. So as you've worked in yoga, and also as you've traveled now to Germany, what are some of the things that have surprised you that you've learned about yourself?
Ooh, that is a good question. Man, I'm constantly learning. I think I learn something new about myself every single day. So that's a loaded question. Let me think for a second. Let's see. Whew. It's this constant evolution of change, right? Like, I am definitely not the same person I was 10 years ago. I'm definitely not the same person I was 5 years ago. I'm not the same person I was before you and I had this conversation, but I think that what I've learned is that the real work is all internal. I can do all these exterior things and do all these great things all day, but if I'm not doing the work in here, it's pointless. And there's a such thing as toxic positivity in the yoga community, right? It's like, it's not all like peace and good vibes, it's like, that's not the truth. That's not the reality. The real authentic truth is that growth is scary, growth is heavy, growth is hard. I've definitely had to break down in order to have breakthroughs. So I think that's one of the main things I've learned about myself, is that I am a very um, uh, I'm a very let's see how to word it. I have the ability to adapt, and I always have, but I learned how to be adaptive to different thoughts, different perceptions about myself, about the world, about others. I learned that I have to get uncomfortable, and I have to get to a point where I'm ready to change everything about how I show up for myself and for others. So I've learned a lot. I don't know where to begin, and I don't know where that ends, but I'm very grateful for the person that I've been able to develop into. And I know that this is just the beginning. Like I know that yoga has led me to, I've been sober for almost 5 years. Yoga led me to that truth within myself, to know that I do not need to alter my state of mind in any sort of way, that I am fulfilled on my own. Yoga has led me to pursue my master's degree, to be a social worker. Yoga has led me to working in a clinical setting as a social worker, being able to incorporate my life lessons and growth into my work. And that involves yoga, and that involves mindfulness. And I would not have any of that without that platform. Yoga has given me the courage to love myself, to love other people, to allow other people to love me, which was a very difficult and big one. Yoga has taught me how to stand for what's right, even if that makes other people uncomfortable. I have found my authentic truth, and I have dropped the concern for looking good to other people and just owned that truth. Yeah, yoga has taught me a lot. It has taught me a lot. It has taught me that life is messy, and that's okay. Yeah, so those are some of my lessons.
Well, that's a lot of great lessons. Where would you like to be, say, 5, 10 years from now? If you had a thought in that, where would you like to be in your life 5, 10 years from now, both in the yoga as well as just in your professional life?
I will be a licensed clinical social worker. So I'm working on my clinical hours right now for my full license. I will be a mother. That's something that my husband and I have been working on bringing into our lives right now as a child. And so in 5 to 10 years, I will be a mother, and I would love to be a foster mother as well. And I would love to travel and speak. I do some public speaking engagements already, but I just want to do it on a much larger scale. I want to speak on a larger level about everything, about yoga, about mindfulness, about growth. Yeah, that's where I'll be. Physically, where will I be? I have no idea, because we are with the military now, so we go where they tell us to go.
Yeah, it could be anywhere. Could be in Germany. Could be back in the States. Could be anywhere along those lines. Now, you talked about even the fact of the addiction and how yoga helped you in that and everything. So, explain to our audience a little bit about what that experience was like, because I know a lot of times when folks are going through whatever their addictions are, and there are all kinds of addictions. There's drug addictions. There's alcohol. There's addictions to other things that exist in society. But when you went through that, how did the yoga help you make that turn?
So I was in the middle of teacher training, and my particular teacher training was really powerful in the aspect that it really introduced you to those breakdowns I was talking about. So it really unlocked a lot of like deeply pushed down feelings and emotions and experiences, and it brought them up. And that was difficult, right? So what I would do my training all day, all morning, all afternoon, all night, go home, and I couldn't handle the things that were being brought up, and I would drink, and it got to a pretty dangerous point. Finished teacher training. I felt like I was doing the work, I was doing the spiritual work, I was doing the emotional work. I was really getting to a place where I was finally loving who I was. And there was still something missing, and it was like, what is this missing? And it was the addiction, right? It was really sucking the life out of me, and it was holding me back from living my authentic truth. And so I got to a really, really, really bad place, and a really big breaking point where it was like, I'm either going to die if I continue to live this way, whether that's by me taking my own life, or this disease taking it for me, or I'm going to change some things. And so I made the decision to change some things. And if it wasn't for yoga, I would have never come to that realization. I never would have. And if it wasn't for yoga supporting me through recovery, I would not have sustained it. So for me, yoga, like the poses and the meditation and the breath work, is just a part of it. It's how I show up in my life, and how I apply the principles and the practices in my life that really matters to me. So I was able to sustain my recovery, and I've been able to gratefully, because of my practices and my self-awareness. And the recovery community is much like the yoga community. It's really, it's so parallel. Like it's not even parallel. It's immersive. It's so connected that it's not even funny. It's like, wow, these two worlds are so amazing, and I want to be in both of them.
Well, and you're doing a great job with that. Now, I know that in one of the conversations I was having with another friend of mine that was doing a show on IBM TV, they were talking about suicide prevention, and that really, I know that goes in a lot with addiction. There was actually a famous Bollywood actor that just recently took his life and everything. That was in his young ages. I think he was in his mid-30s or something like that. So as you're one that's about to go into social work, what are some of the things that you're hoping to be able to take from your life, both in your own addiction travels as well as in the yoga, that you'll be able to share with people that are going through these difficult times? Because a lot of times social workers are dealing with folks that might be thinking about things along that line, or thinking about drugs, or thinking about things of that nature. So just as you're still going through the training, but just right now, if you were able to think of some things that you would be able to share with somebody that was going through that. Like, I know one of the things that I was saying was that a lot of times we hear people crying out, but because of our own busyness, we ignore them. And then when they're gone, then we remember that they tried to reach out to us and we didn't pick up the phone. So like I said, they might have just been trying to do a simple call out and we didn't even bother to pick up the phone. So that's one of the life lessons that I've tried to deal with and learn from, is that, somebody's calling you, you need to at least hear their message.
Yeah, and that's a very powerful one. And people reach out in so many different ways. A lot of people don't know how to reach out. So them asking for help might not look like picking up the phone and asking for help. Them asking for help could be could look like anger. It could look like a million different things, but it's about being aware of somebody that's showing up different, right? Showing up different in any kind of way. If you notice a friend showing up different, don't wait for them to reach out to you, reach out to them. That's what I tell people, that and tell myself, like, if you're thinking about somebody, like, I will think about someone I haven't spoke to in 10 years, like just randomly think about them. And I text them right away, because I've lost too many people to suicide and to addiction that I feel like if someone's on your heart, there's a reason they're on your heart, reach out to them and just say hello. Like, that's all it takes. Hey, I was thinking about you, say hey. But as far as people struggling with that, I work with people now. So I work with the Department of Defense at Behavioral Health. And so we have a lot of soldiers that are facing suicidality. Maybe they are just having the thoughts, maybe they have an intent, maybe they have a plan, and maybe they've had an attempt. And so one of the main things that I like to make sure that they know is that they're not alone. And so self-disclosure in a clinical setting looks different, right? So I can, I feel, get my story through to them without even disclosing any of my personal story. It's just about having that empathy and having that connection, and say, like, look, I hear you, I see you, I know you're hurting. It's okay that you're hurting, but what we can do is we can create some things together. You can create and learn some tools that can help you get to a different space. And I think it's about them knowing that they're not alone. A lot of people go through this through these experiences, feeling like nobody could possibly understand what they're going through. And I've been there, and so I get it. And it's like, so many people deal with mental health struggles. A lot of people are afraid to talk about it. It's still very stigmatized, especially in the military. With the population I'm working with now, it is extremely stigmatized. And so it's like, hey, you're not alone. That's all you have to know. You're not alone. And there is hope. There is growth. You are capable of change. And so I think focusing on their strengths and empowering a person is extremely important, so that they have something positive to focus on and not just the dark space that they're currently in. And so for me, it was yoga, right? I had that thing to focus on, and it was a very positive thing at the time for me to focus on. If I didn't have that, I'm not sure what I would have had. I didn't have anyone guiding me to it. I believe it found me, divine timing kind of thing.
Well, now I know that you said that your husband was definitely in the military, and I've got friends that have been military activists and military advocates. I was just wondering your thoughts on that as well, because it seems to me that even though we have a very active military, and of course they get all kinds of funding, I've had cousins of mine that have been in the military and different relatives of other sorts and everything. But I just wondered if what your thoughts were in terms of how we're doing with the military, and whether we're giving them the kind of support that we need to give them. Because I know a lot of times people feel that when they come back home, they're not getting the kind of attention and the kind of support that they need to get from us here in America, or just the military, or just the society in general. So I just wondering what some of your thoughts are on that, because like I said, your husband's military, and hopefully y'all will come back in the near future to the States. And I just wondered, do you think that we're doing a good enough job of supporting our military?
Whew. Okay. One, I feel it's very important that I say that these are my personal views, and they are not the views of any organization. Loaded question again. So my grandfather was in the Army for 30 years. My dad was in the Army for 30 years. I'm not new to this life, so I'm not new to this. I have seen a lot of growth in the military. Before I started doing work here, I did have a different perspective. I was like, they're not doing anything. Like, I had this really different perspective. Now that I'm in the work, I see that there is work being done. There are a lot of really good people fighting for these soldiers. There are. I do believe that there is still a long way to go. There's still a lot of things that need to change. There's a lot of old school mentality. There's a lot of old school people are the ones making the decisions up top. So I feel that it's going to take some people at the bottom really, really, really fighting and advocating for what they already know is the need, and allowing it to get up to the top, because the military is very structured, right? They have things are set their way. If it's not broke, don't fix it with some things, right? But they do have a lot of policies implemented to support these soldiers. Where the hangup is that there's so much stigma in the military that a lot of soldiers are afraid to reach out for help. So the help is there. It's up to them to use it. I have seen soldiers get ridiculed for reaching out to behavioral health. I have seen soldiers be supported for reaching out to behavioral health. It starts with the leadership. The leadership has to let them know that it's okay. And that takes psychoeducation. It takes people like me and people at behavioral health educating these leaders on what services are available, sharing that there should not be stigma, explaining to them how it can benefit them and their soldiers, and having them pass it down to their soldiers so that they can get the help. I wish that there was more work being done for our soldiers while they're in, so that they're not having to deal with it when they're out. The VA is a different entity. They too have a lot of services, but they too have they have a big population that they have to help, and you can't do it without the funding and without the people to help. A lot of people say, oh, I can't get an appointment. Well, yeah, there's a lot of people that can't get appointments. And so hopefully if we're able to provide these soldiers with the coping tools needed now, they won't need so much help from the VA once they get out. So I'm not even sure if I answered your question. I kind of beat around the bush a lot and kind of went different directions. But
no, that actually touched on your feelings on that. And like I said, just to let you know, my friend Captain Newborn, who's actually not the captain, his folks named him that, and I think they named several members of his family that. But he's done some advocacy work with the veterans, and he has a veterans organization, Next Level Veterans, if I remember correctly, is the name of it and everything. But he's done a lot of work and does a Road to the Apollo show. But I know he talks about a lot of the things that are going on after they get out of the service, and the fact that there's a lot of things that go on in terms of treatment and things that are happening with our veterans after they come back into society that he is not a big fan of, because he feels that like the VA and some of our other government agencies are not doing as much as they could do. So that's one of the things that he talks about, is the fact that he wishes that there was more done, and he talks about things that he would like to see not happen on his watch. It's kind of like one of his little catchphrases, because he'll give some statistics about the suicides and some of the other things that are taking place in our society that he's fighting against. So that's just kind of the things that he's talking about. So he definitely is concerned about those kind of issues.
Yeah, it's a big concern, and there's a lot in the public eye. There's a lot of media and attention on veteran suicide. There's a very high rate of active duty suicide as well, and I think that it's something that there needs to be more awareness of, and there needs to be more advocacy being made. There's the drinking culture in the military, and also the drug culture in the military is very high, and I think that has a lot to do with the suicide rates. And so if there were more coping tools being provided and more alternative solutions for that drinking culture, I think it would be beneficial.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that and everything, that we got to do a better job of that, and doing a better job of just letting folks know what's happening in that regard. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that's happening, is we're not seeing enough of that in society. Fernando was actually asking about isn't being stoic part of the problem? And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, because he actually mentioned that. He said, isn't being stoic a big part of the problem?
Yeah, I think so. That the attitude of like, be tough, don't show feelings, kind of get the job done and move forward. That's kind of old school. That's how I was raised personally. I was raised to like, deal with it, suck it up, keep moving forward, don't cry about it. And that was my dad being 30 years in the Army, and just like real like cut and dry and strict, and that's not okay. And he sees that now that he's out. He sees that, and he sees that it's important to not be that way. And the Army is changing their perspectives, and their address of being stoic has changed. They are working towards a more humanistic approach, like what I like to call it. Soldiers are still human beings, and they're dealing with real life things outside of a combat zone. They're dealing with being away, like just soldiers here in Germany, for example, being away from their families, being away from their friends. A lot of these kids are 18 years old. They've never lived away from home, and now they're living on their own. A lot of people get married really, really young and really early and really quick in the military. I think that's another big issue. There's a lot of marital problems. There's a lot of financial problems. There's a lot of, real life things. With COVID, the soldiers that live in the barracks, so the single soldiers, weren't allowed to leave base. So they're even more isolated. What are you going to do with hundreds of single soldiers in a barracks? They're going to drink, and then incidents escalate because of that. So with the stoic, the Army is hopefully starting to see that these guys are human beings, and they have to address their feelings, or else there's going to be more problems.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I definitely appreciate the conversation with you and everything, but get ready to wrap everything up. But as we get ready to wrap everything up, if folks are interested in learning about your yoga practice, whether it's there in Germany or if you're going to make return trips, I know you did events in the Carolinas, so hopefully you'll make some return trips. But if folks are interested in learning about the yoga practice, if you would share with them your website or how they can reach out to you and things of that nature, and then of you have, as we say on the show all the time, we like to hear people's final thoughts, or if they've got any words of wisdom or things that they would like to just share with the audience in general. So that's the way we'll wrap it up. If you'll share your website, and also if you've got any words of wisdom, it can be around the world, meaning what's happening in the world. It can be about just society in general, or it can be just life in general, but just anything that you would like to share as words of wisdom.
All right. Thank you so much for having me on your show today. And so the best way to contact me, I'm on social media at Kris Brooks, KrisBrooks. I'm active on Instagram. My email is krisbrooksyoga@gmail.com, and my website is krisbrooksyoga.com. So pretty easy to find me on there. And words of wisdom, and just like really get curious about what's inside, and really have the courage to get messy and uncomfortable, so that you can find your authentic selves and really stand up for yourself and your truth. So that's what I got.
Well, that sounds good, and I appreciate that. That was some great advice, and I think it's some very solid advice. So I definitely appreciate you being on. And like I said, we'll be airing this at a later time. I'll get with my partner in crime, Dean, and we'll figure out which day we'll air this one. Because like I said, the usual show is 2 to 4, and then of course our 7 to 9 one. But as I told you, we'll do these special editions because of people's schedules and travels and things of that nature. So I know it'll be sometime this week, and I'll definitely let you know. And of course, when we do it this format, it's also being done live on Facebook Live. So some people have already seen it, but they'll get a chance to see it again on the different platforms. So
okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I hope that you have an awesome week.
Thank you. You do the same.
Hey, and you can do some yoga with me on some video yoga, virtual yoga right now.
Okay.
So I'll send you the link.
All right. Sounds good. Send me the link to the virtual yoga, and I might try that as well.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. That was our conversation with Kris Brooks, and she was definitely a very powerful young lady that is talking about all kinds of things, from what is going on in the world to, of course, her own yoga practice, to some reflections of her past work in the lighting industry. So we definitely enjoyed this great conversation, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with her into the wonders of the virtual world and just life in general. So hopefully at some point we'll also get a chance to see some of her other German friends on the show as well. But we love having people from around the world, and it was our pleasure to have Kris Brooks as one of our guests on this particular morning, and definitely look forward to having more great conversations.
Awesome.